Very much for joining us today. I'll be your moderator today. I'm Carlos Marquez and I work at ATA Insights, and today we have two experts, Emmanuel Taibi from Irena and Adamo Screnci from ThyssenKrupp, who will be telling us all of the insights on the renewable hydrogen market, which is obviously a nascent market and an opportunity to deliver renewable fuel for transport and power and many other uses. Just to remind you that you can introduce yourselves and say where you're actually joining us from on the chat box. Welcome everyone again. So now let's start with a quick presentation. So Adamo, would you mind telling us a couple of words about you?
With pleasure. Thank you, Carlos. Just a quick introduction of myself. I am a young startup in the hydrogen business. I started 30 years ago working with fuel cell at that time for space application. That I worked for big company like Total and chemical plant and Air Liquide in the hydrogen division, which I started. And I created my own company, McPhy Energy, which I put IPO, then work also for the French government to build the hydrogen roadmap for France, for Nicolas Hulot. And 1.5 years ago, I joined ThyssenKrupp, and I will give you a short explanation of what we do in ThyssenKrupp to deploy the energy storage and hydrogen division. So I am an electrochemical engineer and also with an MBA from INSEAD.
Thank you very much, Adamo. And Emanuele, it's your turn.
Thank you, Carlos, and good morning, everyone. My name is Emanuele Taibi. I'm working for the International Renewable Energy Agency, and I'm responsible for power sector transformation strategies. So in a nutshell, all we are looking at in my team is to see the opportunities for decarbonizing the power sector through different means. And we do work on hydrogen as well as one of those means. So we look at power system flexibility, we look at storage in all the different time domains, and we look at opportunities for sector coupling. And we do analysis working with member countries, applying some of this knowledge to their planning processes and provide information as an intergovernmental organization to the different stakeholders in the countries.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And now, without further delay, if you can start sharing your presentation, Emanuele, will be the first to present. And in the meantime, I'd like to remind you that this is your chance to ask all the questions you've always had on renewable hydrogen. So I can't guarantee that we'd be able to answer them, but I'm fairly sure that Adamo and Emanuele will do the best. And to pose your questions, post them on the Q&A box, which you'll see on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And over to you, Emanuele.
Thank you, Carlos. So the presentation I'll share with you today is based on a report we launched in September last year, which is somehow the first report that in which we frame hydrogen as an important solution for energy transition. So as a technology outlook is somehow a first of a series. So I will also go through some of the ongoing work that we're doing at Irena in this space. So first of all, a few words about Irena. We are an intergovernmental organization with fairly universal membership. We have currently 160 member countries and 23 in the process of joining. Our headquarters is in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and the agency has been established about 8 years ago. We have an innovation and technology center in Bonn, Germany, where I'm based, and we have a representation at the UN in New York. Our mandate is a global mandate to assist countries in the acceleration of renewable energy deployment in all its forms. A bit of context. So this is the latest global roadmap for 2050. This is a Paris compliant roadmap that we presented in its last iteration about a year ago. The new one is forthcoming in 3 weeks. The Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. These two charts try to tell two stories or two sides of the same story, let's say. So how do we get to a decarbonized energy system? Well, in this specific case, you would see that we need to speed up action, and the green line shows the trajectory to be compliant with Paris, and the yellow is the reference case, which includes current policies in place. So we need to do significant decarbonization in different sectors. The other side of this is that not all sectors are equally easy, or let's say some sectors are more difficult than others to decarbonize. And in the chart below, you see those that are with a dashed filling line. In particular, heavy industry and heavy transport are quite complex to decarbonize by directly electrifying them. But one of the angles to it is you can electrify the fuels. And this is how we're going to frame our work on hydrogen in the coming slides. Electrification of fuels, meaning using renewable power to produce hydrogen or derivatives from hydrogen that can be used to decarbonize difficult sectors. Just to set the scene, hydrogen is not new in the sense that this has already been an established market. There is a market for hydrogen, in particular ammonia for fertilizer being the largest, but many other uses, and as you can see, they're mostly in industry. This is why also there is an opportunity for industry to be somehow a low-hanging fruit there, given hydrogen is already utilized today. The main element there to show on the right-hand side is that half of the hydrogen today is produced from steam methane reforming and natural gas. About a third comes from oil and about 20% from coal, and the remaining 4% is electrolysis. And what we are suggesting here is that for hydrogen to be a way to decarbonize the energy sector, that 4% has to go towards 100%, or let's say it has to significantly increase, while at the same time the total size of the pie should also increase several fold. So at the moment we're talking about around 8 exajoule, and if we want to go at scale, we need to increase that several times, up to an order of magnitude, depending on the different scenarios. To give a bit better overview of where hydrogen can go once it's produced, so our focus is somehow on the first part of the picture, so the yellow part. We are a renewable energy agency, so we look at it as a vector for renewable electricity to go into end-use sectors. But of course, the complexity of hydrogen is supply chain as well, not just production. So once you leave the electrolyzer, you can go through many different routes, and there could be also other sources of hydrogen beyond this, for instance, from biomass, or of course, fossil fuel with CCS. But once the hydrogen is produced, there are very diverse ways of getting it to the end users, and we will touch upon that a little bit later. But essentially, decarbonizing transport has the advantage of being able to use fuel cell electric vehicles, which are significantly more efficient than internal combustion engines. Decarbonizing industry, as there are limited alternatives to hydrogen to decarbonize industry. And then finally, decarbonizing the gas grid. There is a significant interest from the gas industry, a renewed interest compared to the one, let's say, of 15 years ago, looking at the opportunities of utilizing existing infrastructure for distributing green hydrogen or green electrofuels using the existing infrastructure. This is the report we launched in September. You can access it for free on our Irena's website. Some of the recommendations, I will not have the time to go through all of them, but just some of the recommendations that we put forward in the report is to really start from the low-hanging fruits and start building scale, because scale is key to reduce cost. And at the moment, the main challenge on hydrogen is not so much technical, but is really on the cost competitiveness with incumbent fuels. So there are several alternatives with which hydrogen will compete in some sectors and limited alternatives in others. And the point is to get first to scale, reduce cost, and then other sectors will open up. We had an event at the Irena Innovation Week where we launched this report, where we had experts from different organizations and institutions discussing with us their view on hydrogen for the forthcoming decades. And we also had a poll where we discussed with the participants in the session. So over 100 people were there. And we tried to see how the discussions in the session influence the perception of hydrogen because we noticed that there is a very diverse perception in different stakeholders about the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. And we try to run the poll before the session and after the session to see if the discussion changed a little bit the perception. And somehow it was a renewable event, so most people, both in the medium and longer term, 10 to 20 years from now, they saw hydrogen as a way to integrate more solar and wind into the energy system. And we, of course, agree with that view. Additionally, after the session, there was an increased emphasis on the role of hydrogen to decarbonize industry in the next 20 years, as opposed to transportation as it was before the session. And finally, more and more people got convinced that this is a way to get solar and wind electricity into end-use sectors. Couple of words about supply chain. One of the pathways here is, of course, to start from scale and then look at a diversity of ways to distribute this hydrogen. So close to production, centralized distribution system using, for instance, the gas grid, and then intercontinental shipping. And more we see this as two quite complementary business models. So close to demand with significant opportunities to minimize supply chain costs, however, with somehow more expensive grid electricity, or going to the best locations in the world where you can get lowest cost renewables, no grid fees, but then you would have more expensive supply chain to get the hydrogen from where it's produced to the areas where it's demanded. Another pictorial of that process, somehow best renewable resources going through on electrolyzers, producing hydrogen, and then additional costs would come from handling, storage, shipping, and of course, converting the hydrogen back into a usable form and delivering it to the end users. We did some cost analysis in the report, and now we're doing further cost analysis. It's quite complex given the number of steps to be considered. The message in this slide is that there seems to be a threshold below which it becomes economically interesting, and that is about $3 a kilogram of hydrogen. This changes depending on jurisdiction. In some places, the target is more about the price of the pump, so it's a transportation kind of metric. In other places, it's more about the cost of producing it, but at the end, what matters is the competitiveness at the end use for a fuel. So here we're showing a case where there is extremely cheap PV. PV, unfortunately, doesn't give very high full load hours on the electrolyzers, and that makes it difficult alone to be economically competitive. The situation is a bit better with wind because the electrolyzer is better utilized, but still the cost is not yet as low as it is for solar. And ideally, the best way to go is a combination of the two, and increasing the full load hours when we have complementary solar PV and wind resources, and at the same time keeping the price relatively low for electricity would get us there. Now, we saw more recent numbers, and that's why we're redoing some of the economics, and we're breaking them down with different supply chain options. It seems to be quite promising. So what we're trying to do now is to keep an eye at recent developments and new studies and new technologies advancements, and trying to see what are the early opportunities to get scale. So one example that has been quite prominent in recent months is the idea of producing hydrogen from best renewable resources out of Australia and shipping it to Japan, where there is demand but less opportunities for large-scale production. And so these two charts show simply two different shipping routes. One is ammonia, the other one is liquefied hydrogen. Ammonia is a well-established commodity, shipped widely already today as a base feedstock for fertilizer mostly, and liquefied hydrogen is not there yet. However, we have seen in recent years the surge in liquefied natural gas trade, and somehow, although more expensive than pipelines, this has been growing steadily over the last decade, and that could be somehow a precursor of a liquid hydrogen market. Technology, however, is still in early stages compared to LNG. What we're showing here is electrolysis today with $43 a megawatt hour electricity and 68% load factor, meaning that if you have a megawatt, you will produce 680 kilowatt on average from these resources over a year. There is potential for reducing significantly the cost of electricity over time and to increase the load factor, for instance, in combination with storage and reducing the size of the electrolyzer. And that in the medium term can give us a much more competitive price for hydrogen. And what we're showing here is that this is even more competitive with alternatives from fossil fuels like coal gasification and CCS, and steam methane reforming on natural gas with CCS. CCS is the red part. The top part of the stack bar chart essentially shows the different cost for the ammonia route versus the liquefaction route. I will not go into too much detail. Point being that ammonia seems to have an edge on cost for the time being. And the other important element is that we still need scale to bring down the cost from renewables, and we see this cost coming down rapidly, while we probably cannot see the same for coal and natural gas. And therefore, there is an opportunity there for reaching this target of going below $3 a kilogram in the near future. In conclusion, a few key points. There is really a case for strengthening the economic case for intercontinental hydrogen trade. So areas where there is no electricity demand, but excellent renewable resources could be exporting, and including current fossil fuel producers that have some of these excellent solar resources could be considering that as a diversification option. At the moment, it's still cheaper to produce it as it's being produced so far from fossil fuels. However, the economic case for hydrogen from renewable power is getting better and better. The concept of dedicated renewable energy plants is, again, the most promising in the long term. So in the short term, grid-connected large-scale electrolyzers are somehow more practical as they're closer to the load. But in the long term, there is significant renewable potential that is untapped and in different parts of the world, and this could create a global market. There are a bit of uncertainties regarding the applications. So, for instance, Asia seems to be very keen on transport, Europe as well. Industrial applications are considered where industry has a significant role in terms of energy demand. In terms of feedstock, ammonia is already produced at scale today, and it offers the early opportunity of producing ammonia from renewable hydrogen. And then finally, some of the heavy industry, in particular steel, seems to offer interesting alternative pathways, such as, for example, using the hydrogen to produce directly reduced iron and then export the iron instead of the hydrogen. We are doing some work in this space, and we see some interesting economic opportunities where shipping a commodity might be better than shipping a fuel. And with this, I'll be happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Emanuele, for your presentation. Very interesting. There is a question for you already in the Q&A box, which you might want to answer in writing or later on, after Adamo gives his presentation. So could you please stop sharing your screen, and then we'll switch over to Adamo, to Renchi, who will give us his presentation. So, and in the meantime, I'd like to encourage you to please post your questions. You can do so at the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. So, Emanuele, I believe that you switch off your camera, but still your screen is, you're still sharing your presentation. So there we go. Now we can switch over to Adamo. Great.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you Well, so without further delay, please, Adamo, over to you.
I hope you can see the screen. Hopefully it works. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everybody. I will start now to talk about the large-scale water electrolysis. This is made by ThyssenKrupp Decline Engineers. And I already introduced myself as spending almost of my professional life in the hydrogen business and hoping for this moment to arrive. What are for us, I think, the key value for green hydrogen? First of all, we all know what is coming on after the COP21, where I participated in Paris, that there is an issue with the CO2. And Emmanuel also told you that there is a big challenge for our humanity to cope with the CO2 emission and, in fact, the climate change. And the good thing is that at this moment, renewable energy are becoming very economics and competitive compared to fuel. The second point, I would say, we need to use our legacy. Here we can talk about the gas infrastructure, which is one strong legacy we have in different countries, but it's also something it can be valorized in the future and the development in the energy transition. We see also, you can see on the third bullet point, that there is a big pressure on the local emission targets. Big city, what happened with the Dieselgate, etc. It pushes industry to evolve and to change. And the fourth point is we need to supply energy in the different countries, and there's a diversification of energy supply, especially for me, renewable. And I think it's really the good time to do it. And when people say hydrogen is the future, my answer is always no, this is today. It's not the future. Because today we can make it happen, and to have the intersectoral connection, as we said, we are talking about heat, mobility, fuel and chemicals and power. And then hydrogen can make the link between all this energy transition. Can also give a good, very strong service in balancing the demand and supply, because with the development of renewable, you know that it's important to balance demand and supply. And you can also go from energy to all the utilization. I took always this nice chart from the Hydrogen Council. Maybe you are aware of that. You know, it's used in different presentation to show what is the power of hydrogen coming from, you know, renewable. And you can bring energy and store energy and use this energy in different applications. You can see 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are transportation, industrial application, heating, and feedstock, because we need hydrogen as a chemical to produce all the other chemicals. And again, Emmanuel was talking about 8 exajoule to 80 exajoule in 2050. These are the numbers we are looking at. In one picture, what can ThyssenKrupp offer? Of course, hydrogen production, large scale, but also in the same company, you can find methanol plant, ammonia plant and fertilizer, synthetic natural gas plant producing SNG from CO2 and green hydrogen, and in fact, linking the hydro energy production to the application. That can be chemical, agriculture, mobility, and power plant. This is full EPC solution can be supplied to customers. Just to let you know, we are the world leader in ammonia plant deliver. One of the leaders in the methanol, the world in synthetic natural gas. But I will focus today in the hydrogen. As introduction, few words about ThyssenKrupp, because maybe not everybody knows ThyssenKrupp. 42 billion euro sales, 160,000 employees that make it happen, more than 200 years heritage, present in more than close to 80 countries. So it's really a multi-international team. Myself, I am working in a smaller division, 25,000 people. Building plants. Plants for plastics, chemicals, methanol, ammonia, etc. And you see here also electrolysis. This is a small 200 megawatt electrolyzer, as for example, to show you what is the size of equipment we can deliver. In the electrolysis, as you have seen before, 4% of the hydrogen today is already produced by electrolysis. 50% of that market is from ThyssenKrupp. Today producing the big plant, more than 42 million tons per year chlorine, which is already more than 10 gigawatts of electrolyzer installed in the world, representing close to 1 million tons of hydrogen per year produced and sold to the typical gas company you may know, Linde, Air Liquide, Praxair, and Air Products. The key element is electrodes. Of course, electrode is the heart of the electrolysis, and it's important, the development and the story to optimize this electrode, because on the planet you have a lot of big names in electricity company. GE, Schneider, ABB, Siemens are very strong company in electricity. You have big names in chemicals, Dow Chemical, BASF, Bayer, etc. But when you go to electrochemistry, when you play with high current, high voltage, nice molecules, hydrogen, chlorine, or oxygen, you find the world is smaller. And together with our team of De Nora, which is the leader in catalyst, we are close to 2,000 engineers dedicated to electrochemistry, and by far the biggest team in the world. So we developed, optimized the electrochemistry for hydrogen, pure hydrogen production, with, of course, zero gap technology, high efficiency cathode, separators and diaphragm, etc. And what is important, we work on an existing asset which allow us to supply today, every year, more than 600 megawatts of electrolyzer. This is already starting to be an interesting number. Okay, so we also have been working in the last 10 years to develop a standardized product, because it's important to be cost competitive and close to the market and to decrease the capex. And we have developed a module. You see the picture of the module, and this module afford you to be very footprint efficient, less than 2,500 square meter for 100 megawatt electrolyzer, which is the top in the class in the world compared to any other supplier. Standard modular design to be able to ship everywhere in the world and to limit the site work. 82% stack efficiency, also best in class today. 77 full plant efficiency on the electrolysis to produce hydrogen, purified and compressed. 98% availability, which is key also. Lifetime of more than 30 years. No stack exchange during all the lifetime, just recoating, which is a very good impact in the environment and the total cost of ownership. Of course, high purity, fully automated. Why fully automated? Because it's coming from chemical industry, where you don't want to have people on site. Safety is number one. So it's totally unmanned, totally full control and unmanned. And very fast reacting to power market and flexible for partial load to cope with fluctuation of wind and solar. This has been demonstrated also. We have a small demo, 2 megawatt, really small, but at least we can play with it, where we tested all that parameters, ramp up, ramp down, lifetime, etc. To play with it. It's the same stack as used in big industrial scale, but I will go faster. Again, modular design. One key point also for the building here, the electrolyzer do not create any attacks area. We have these specific design parameters that allow us not to be considered as attack zone. So this will divide it by 2, the building cost, the infrastructure cost, and the maintenance cost. So it's really a key component that we don't create any attack zone for the ones that are familiar with hydrogen, which is a key issue. Few nice numbers to discuss, because during the last years, everybody's trying to find the right business case. The business case is a tricky thing, because of course we want to decarbonize the world. Of course we want to reduce the CO2 emission. Of course, all that as a personal being. But we are also part of our industrial organization. It has to be a business. And we see now we are close to getting business cases that are running. And we experimented hundreds of different business cases, peak shaving, load shifting, storage of hydrogen, mobility, ammonia, methanol, SNG, all that. There are a lot of parameters. How many hours are we going to work for the electrolyzer? Is it base load? Is it partial load? And what is important to evaluate in that field? Is it the CapEx or the OpEx? Of course, it's easy to understand that if you have a limited number of hours, you need to have a lower capex, and the capex has an impact. With the technology we have, we can change the capex and the opex, because we can work on the electrolysis at different current density from 2 to 20, which is give a huge range of application to optimize the plant to the business case we want. So this is just to give you some example of business cases we are running. And we see the cost of hydrogen being in the range of 2 to 3 euro per kilo, which is still higher than the gas, because the yellow line is a gas, about approximately 25 euro per megawatt hour. So the target is really to compete with gas. And this is really the target where you can open huge market. I wanted to share with you also a nice slide I found in Netherlands, because we always say, what is much convenient to move, gas or electricity? And I took these two lines that are connecting Netherlands and UK, the BritNet and the BBL. These are two lines that are approximately 200 kilometers each one. Were installed in 2009 and 2011, if I do remember. The capex was approximately the same, 500 million each one, to connect UK and Netherlands. The BritNet has a capacity of power of 1 gigawatt. And each year, you transport in this BritNet cable 8 terawatt hours. The BBL has a capacity of 15 gigawatt, same capex, huh? And transport 120 terawatt hours per year of energy from Netherlands to UK. So I give you the message. I don't know. Is it better to transport electricity, electron, or chemical? I would say, compared to, if you look at the capex and the time, I think chemicals are much cheaper to transport. And I think everybody is aware of that, but it's good to see that in face. The second one is, do we look at decentralized, more small scale or big scale? And these are the curve from NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory of US, that shows what are the capex and the cost of residential PV at 6 kilowatt and the big one going to 100 megawatt. And you see that there is no discussion. Cheaper is bigger. Bigger is cheaper. That's why we see this big, huge solar plant. And we were talking about Australia and Chile. Of course, there are one big industry, one place where we can develop more renewable. You need 5 gigawatt plant, will cost much more less. And also, please consider, you don't have a refinery or a steel plant at every corner of a building. You need to be big to be economics. Same for wind. Huh? You know, now the wind, one windmill can produce 12 megawatt. I've seen that there is one at 15 megawatt now that coming in one single windmill. So big, make it cheaper and make it competitive. Same discussion when you want to transport this amount of material. If you want to do this with a pickup, it will take some time and some money. It will cost you more. So this is always a discussion between mass production and economy of scale. And at a certain moment, if you want to be big, and we are talking about energy, you have to be in a large scale, really. This is what we are aiming. That's why our target is to do electrolyzer in the range of minimum 500 megawatt. This is our target in the next years. And to be competitive with gas, with CCS. You see that if we put on top of the gas, the cost of CCS or CO2 cost or whatever, you increase the cost of your gas, of course, and doing so, the hydrogen can be competitive, close to be competitive. In the 2 euro per kilo, in some area, you can be competitive to this gas market. And this opened a huge amount of application, like ammonia, we were talking about steel. I give you an example. We are now on one project in Australia, a small one, 50 ton per day ammonia with a 30 megawatt electrolyzer. One small project is equivalent in putting 60,000 Toyota Mirai on the street. So can you imagine how much you have to do as investment, filling station, to put 60,000 Mirai on the street? It's a huge, huge effort. And this is done in a small scale plant of ammonia. Of course, we are very active since I joined the ThyssenKrupp 1.5 years ago. We are now a steering member of the Hydrogen Council, but also on the Ammonia Fuel Association and also the Green Ammonia Association in Japan. We joined recently. That's it, in few words. I would say what is key that we have today a supply chain to deliver 600 megawatt per year, easily expandable to 3 gigawatt per year. We are already more than 10 gigawatt installed, which is more than 1 million ton of hydrogen per year already produced. Electrolysis hydrogen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Adamo, for your presentation. Very interesting. We have a number of questions that have come up from your presentation, and we'll start answering them shortly. But you know, there seems to be one question I'd like to ask first, which is it looks like the key for the hydrogen to be adopted widely is for the cost to be competitive with natural gas, and for that you need to get scale. So, you know, what's the key? So, you know, any ideas of how we might reach large scale adoption of hydrogen, which will enable cost reduction? I don't know who wants to go first.
Yeah, I can start, and then of course, Emmanuel, you can give your thoughts. I think the green hydrogen is coming only for two reasons. There are two levels: cheap electricity, climate pressure. If you don't have that, it doesn't work. Because, you know, as you show, only 4% of the hydrogen was produced by electrolysis in the past, because it was maybe in some small place convenient. So we need these two levels: real policy regarding climate and cheap electricity that make it possible. You know, we didn't stop the carbon, the coal, to fuel, to oil, because it was environmentally. It was easier to use, it was more friendly, it was more practical. And same today, the renewable are pushing. And this is why I believe in a green hydrogen coming with more renewable. This is my...
Okay. Emanuele, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I fully agree. Maybe a comment on this for those that have been following hydrogen for a bit longer, like early 2000, there was first wave of excitement about hydrogen. And definitely what Adamo just mentioned is what we see as the key game changer. Renewable electricity was expensive, was the most precious commodity. It was, of course, seen as green. It was a way to start removing carbon from the power sector. Now it's so much cheaper than anything else that changes completely the paradigm. So it is so cheap that you could even produce fuels from it that could be cheaper than fossil fuels, which was unthinkable 15 years ago.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. We'll move on to some of the questions that have been asked here from the audience. So we have a question on the topic of scale. Christian Conan asks, for economies of scale, overall plans, bigger is better, but the plans have to be modular. So you get can you also get economics of scale of mass production of a single building blocks? So I suppose the question is, does a standalone plant need to be, you know, big on its own, or could you have lots of plants which are modular but overall produce scale? Would you have a similar effect? Over to the experts.
I will start to do that. I think yes, economy of scale makes sense also, and a big plant. But you make the parallel with a solar panel. You know, they are produced in small size, in large quantity. But a big plant of 5 gigawatts will produce always cheaper electricity than the individual solar panel on your house. No question. It will be twice the price, minimum. You have both economy of scale and mass production. This is right. So there will be a market for all of that. I'm sure there will be small filling station with a small trucks or captive fleet, and you need in that case, dedicated production. But for me, the ratio is the same as the ratio today in electrolysis. This small decentralized production will be less than 5% of the total hydrogen for me. This is just my thinking. You need to be big to be economics, and to produce in a large quantity and to make it really happen. If we just do small filling station, just look at the past. I started the first filling station in Luxembourg in 2003. It was 15 years ago. We are 15 years after that. Tell me how much fuel cell cars are in Europe. Few hundreds. It's peanuts, you know. It's really peanuts. On the CO2 impact and the environment is nothing. You change one industrial site of ammonia, a big one, and not the small one we are doing. It's like 6 million cars. How much money you have to invest and how much you have to do to transform 6 million cars to hydrogen? Think about it.
Excellent point. Really nothing to add from my side. Some early opportunities might exist in niche markets where the incumbent fuel is very expensive. One being some of the most remote locations where you might need to go beyond just batteries, but there is a tough competition with batteries, such as remote locations in islands where you might want to produce hydrogen to store multiple days of fuel, but that's a tough competition with PV and batteries nowadays. Another one could be some of the filling stations where you want to cap all the logistic costs and produce on the site, but how cheap electricity can you buy from the grid in your filling station, and how do you make sure that this is renewable electricity? It's another story. So if you saw my stack bar charts, you can save about a third of the cost of hydrogen by skipping all the logistics, but then your production cost goes up significantly because the scale of the electrolyzer is smaller, cost of electricity is higher, the load factor is lower. So there are some niche applications, but as Adamo said, it's a single-digit percentage point. The big thing for hydrogen is to replace large energy-intensive demand sources and switch them to renewables through a clean fuel.
Okay, good point. So I think you both agree that scale is important, and yeah, it's very true that, you know, in the power sector, which is a sector I know much better than hydrogen, that, you know, if you have a large scale plant, that's always going to be cheaper. It will deliver cheaper power than a solar panel in your house or a microgrid. So it's a point I think, you know, everyone in this audience can grasp. You know, on the topic of the applications, what do you think are the main applications or the, let's call it, the like low-hanging fruit? So the initial applications where hydrogen could have the biggest impact the soonest.
Start again, Carlos? I think it was the conclusion of Emmanuel. We didn't prepare in advance, huh? And this is funny, but I really think if you look at ammonia and steel, I would say it's easy. Relatively easy, but it's easy. And this has a huge impact. It's already 660 million tons of hydrogen, more than 1 billion tons of CO2. And it's relatively easy. You know, I was talking to one guy producing fertilizer. And if you can buy tomorrow your nice cereal for the breakfast, where you have a big logo inside, on top, and written, without oil inside. You know, are you ready to pay 5 cents more? I think yes. And this is a total impact if you go to green ammonia, fertilizer, on the cereal you eat on the breakfast in the morning. And if you put a big logo with no oil inside. You know, when you eat something and it's written with no oil inside, because you have to know that there's oil inside today, this is a typical market. So ammonia, I think easy, relatively easy. You know, I don't say it's easy. In terms of capex, lifetime, etc. You have to adapt. Steel, DRI, we were talking also. Emmanuel talked about steel, relatively easy. Mobility, I think we have to focus on large-scale mobility, like big trucks and buses with captive fleet, where it makes sense. Because today, you know, every of the 100 filling stations in Europe, they have a business case where the payback is between 150 and 200 years. Who's going to pay that? You know, you have to be economic sometimes. So these are, for me, the most priority. And today, as we see, renewable energy is decreasing, the cost is competitive, and you can produce a lot of things at that. Then after that, you can open the door to a lot of different things. All the chemicals, all the fuel, synthetic fuel, etc., which can be later. And imagine you have a big plant, 100 or 200 megawatt in one area, whatever, you know, in Barcelona. And you can produce ammonia for fertilizer there, not import the ammonia from, I don't know where, from Australia maybe, or whatever, or Brunei or Middle East. You know, you import a lot from Middle East. You produce there competitiveness, and then you put 3 or 4 filling stations close to that site. The hydrogen will be more economics. And so the industry can really help a lot development of the mobility, and not the opposite.
Again, agree. In 2 points, ammonia and steel seem to be the low-hanging fruits. Definitely the fuels they use today are very expensive, but renewable hydrogen is getting there. One angle that I really liked from a CEO of a company that was is a company that produces and transmits electricity, that told policymakers in our innovation week was like, yes, we will get there, but if you give us today $50 per ton of CO2, we do it today.
Exactly, the CO2 tax has to be real and implemented. You know, this is, then after that it's easy.
Great. Well, very good points. Moving on to another question, which is a question that is always asked in these kinds of webinars. So someone's asking about safety of hydrogen, and you know, is it safe to transport hydrogen? You know, how is safety managed, and why is it associated with? Why does this question come up so often?
Again, I should start. You know, you can find on internet a lot of testing made by Toyota for the cars. Also making video if you make a sparkle on a traditional gasoline cars and an hydrogen, and you will immediately understand that it's safer than all the fuel. What's the answer? You know, as soon as you wake up in the morning to work, you are in a stable situation, of course. Otherwise, you don't work. So if you want to have a safe situation, stay in your bed and wait for death. That's it. I say, no, we have to be careful. Hydrogen is widely used in the world, used in compressed application. It's just kind of explaining that to people, and in Japan, they did it well because they started 20 years ago going to school for young children at 10 years old, which are now 20 or 30 and becoming engineers. And they are used to fill an hydrogen cars, have hydrogen pipe in Fukuoka, in all the cities, in the building, in the home. So I think no. Another point I would focus, you remember maybe, or maybe you don't remember, what was town gas. Town gas some years ago, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, was produced from gasification of coal. And you make gasification of coal, and town gas was in all the city. What do you produce? 60% hydrogen gas. So, okay, nothing is perfect, but I think this is not the question. Safety of hydrogen is no more a question at all.
Again, fully agree, and I think one angle to look at it is consumer preference. There are a lot of things that are done nowadays in the energy space that might not be the most economical, but they might be what the consumer wants. So if you buy a very expensive, very fast electric battery-powered car, this is because you want to buy it. It's not because it's the cheapest thing you could be doing. There are also small, slower electric cars that are probably today already the cheapest thing you could be doing, but people still buy the faster one if they can afford it. So at the end, if you don't feel comfortable in filling your car with hydrogen, you don't have to. But a lot of houses have natural gas inside. Natural gas is also explosive, and you don't want to typically have it in your house, but you do, and that's typically very safe. But as we said before, this is mostly about decarbonizing difficult applications. So large freight transportation, so an LNG ship doesn't seem like the place you bring your children to play. The same for a refinery or an ammonia plant. These are not facilities that are, let's say, for the general public to access, yet they're relatively safe. And this is where the scale happens. So This is where you're going to see most of it. The questions seem to be mostly focused about passenger cars, but there you have other electric vehicles that compete quite strongly with it. When it comes to ships and refineries, petrochemical plants, fertilizer plants, this is not a question. There are procedures in place, there are safety measures. Some of these fuels are as complex to handle as hydrogen, if not more. And this is done by professionals, so I don't see an issue there.
Right, thank you very much. So I think that's a fairly clear and comprehensive answer. I have a different question. I've seen you answering questions on this, about this topic on the Q&A box in writing, but I'd like to bring the conversation out, out loud, which is about storing renewable power, using hydrogen as a means of storing renewable power. And there is a concept that says, like, a lot of power in Europe or everywhere gets curtailed. So it's produced when the grid cannot take it. So it's essentially disconnected, this power gets spilled, but yet this results in a cost for someone. So normally for the operator of the grid, that compensates the wind power producer or the solar producer for the spilled power. So could we use this power to generate hydrogen? This electricity is being thrown away anyway, so it should be cheap. So to what extent could we do that?
Carlos, I will try, because I missed one word. I don't know, the connection was not so nice, but you're talking about storing excess of renewable energy. Yes. And of course, if you make for me, you have to be pragmatic. You produce electricity with a great value. Use it as you can, as much as you can. You can use it for all the application you are in an island or whatever, you use electricity as it is. Then first stage, you want to store a little bit for short period. Batteries are good. They are efficient and you can store a small amount. Half an hour, 1 hour, let's say 2 hours, that's fine. Because the efficiency, rotor efficiency can be good. I'm not a specialist of the battery, but I think it's not bad idea. Of course, after that, you have to take care about all the lifetime of the battery, the impact on the environment. There are a lot of discussion today about the impact of lithium-ion production, etc. But technically speaking, it's a good, because you have more than 90% efficiency and you have back electricity, which is a high value product. Then you have still more energy that you cannot store for long term. And this is the difficulties. But I don't compete with this technology. My idea is just to add application with renewable energy. Can be a source of something to do health. Because in every country, you use fuel, you use gas, you use oil. And you can produce this oil and gas with renewable. This is the way we see the development. And the production of renewable energy but can be multiplied by thousands. And it's really to go there much deeper and produce more raw material, electricity as a raw material to produce gas to heat, to produce fuel to move the cars, and to produce chemicals things. This is where I see. So in a way, it stores the energy, but it takes the excess of energy and produce something else. We have to be pragmatic and to avoid every conversion step. It's just physics. Huh? Each time you make a conversion, you lose efficiency. You have efficiency. So avoiding that. But at the end, as you said, if you can put 10 gigawatt of solar in Chile, they don't need it. They can do something for that, with that.
I think this is the core of my work here at Irena. So essentially, the issue of curtailment is an interesting one in terms of perception. So first of all, most of the curtailment happening might have to do with how you operate your power system. So first of all, look at your operations. Second, might have to do with your market. You might have opportunities of using this energy, but the market is not able to make the best use of it. Another element is sometimes interconnection or cross-border exchange between countries is not as developed as it should be. You have the cable, but you don't use it to the best of its potential. In other cases, there is a transmission constraint, definitely cheaper to build a transmission line, although there are challenges there too, than to build a hydrogen and a pipeline, hydrogen electrolyzer and a pipeline to replace a cable. Finally, storage has a role to play as well, and that has been especially very complementary to transmission, as transmission takes way longer to be built, although it's cheaper normally. Then finally, the vision we have for 2050 is that there will be so much renewable electricity produced from solar and wind that there will be seasonal imbalances. And so at the end, you can even out the seasonal imbalances by producing a fuel that is relatively easy to store. So part of it will go into heat for countries that have a significant heat demand. There will be power to heat. And then the last mile would be everything else could be even out with a fuel production. So hydrogen being the one that at scale can finish the job for the decarbonization, but it's certainly not the way I would go for today's curtailment. First of all, look at power system operation, market design, regulations, transmission expansion, and then very much down the line, this is not a business case for today and not a business case that is designed for scaling up hydrogen. There are other applications, as we discussed, to scale up hydrogen today in the industry sector, for instance, in the freight sector.
Okay, very, very good points, and thank you very much. So, yes, so to sum up, there are many other things you could do to minimize curtailment before you even look at using it to generate chemicals or to store it in a medium like hydrogen. So, and it might be more cost effective to do those things. And see, we have a few more questions left, but I am afraid that we also have not much time left. So like all good things, this webinar also must come to an end. And before we do that, I'd like to thank all of everyone in the audience who's been here with us today. And I'd like to thank Aramo and Emanuele for the presentations and the insights they have shared today. It's been very, very insightful. Emanuele, would you like to say a few parting words to the audience before we leave?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for staying with us through this webinar. It's been a pleasure answering some of the questions and having this discussion. Thank you to the organizers for the opportunity of sharing some of the work that we do at Irena and our view on the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. And of course, most welcome to follow up by email afterwards for any further question. With this, thank you very much.
Thank you, Emanuele. Aramo, any few parting words?
Yeah, I was very happy to share and to discuss with by question and answer. I was very happy to see the motivation, to see the number of participants that are looking at the webinar. It's also enthusiastic. Very happy for the organization, which went very fine. Again, always available. Any question, anything we could do and help in giving answers to the people that are looking for hydrogen deployment are welcome. Because as I said at the beginning, it's now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Adamo. And before I'd leave, I'd like to remind you that you could access webinars like this at atainsights.com. You can see all of the webinars we have on our list, and you can keep on learning about renewable energy. All our webinars are free to attend. So, please tell your colleagues and everyone we're happy for you to join us. And remember, you will get an email with the recording and the presentations of this webinar. So never fear, you will have access to those in a few days' time. So thank you very much for being with us today, and have a good day. Goodbye.